first panel you are about to watch right now, which is a book, a movie, and a TV series. Why this is important? Well, we know content is the key word, and everybody's looking for that. So without further ado, let me introduce you the panelists, starting with the moderator, which is, without me calling. Okay, not after Alexia. Okay, Matt Brennan from Los Angeles Times. Arvan Koshravi from SVP International TV Production at Fifth Season. Alexia Melocchi, co-founder of Little Studio Film. Michele Zatta, commissioning editor, international co-production at Rai Fiction. Michael Gordon, TV Global scripted agent at CAA. Brian First, chief content officer at GPS Studio. And Alex Brighton, president at Ton Media. Enjoy this great panel.
Can you all hear me? Hello?
Yeah, I think you're on.
Better? Yes, better. Thank you all for joining me on this panel. I was bloviating about the newspaper business so that I didn't waste my questions in our previous conversation. So now I get to ask them. I am really thrilled to talk about this process, and my sort of goal with the line of questioning for all of you out there is to sort of take us through the process from discovery to lessons learned. And everyone has such a different sort of role to play in the process of adaptation and of finding material and adapting it. So I'm really excited to hear all those different perspectives. So my first question is, how are you finding books to read, IP to adapt? Like, where are you looking? Are you looking at bestseller lists? Are you looking at the slush pile? Are you looking at things that people are handing to you in meetings? Where's your discovery happening?
Thank God for Book Scouts, who at Fifth Season we have scouts here in America and in the UK as well that source IP that is in the very early stages, has not been published yet, etc. I think a lot of people use them, obviously, and it's one of the major ways that we get an early read on things that we then either think strategically about how to sort of place them and how to package around them, and as we're thinking about how to, win those books, right, win the rights, or just say, thanks for this early look. It's not something that either we or any of our partners want to pursue. So that's typically the way it goes. And then a lot of our, the producers that we have a lot of business with or deals with or own piece of their company, et cetera, will come to us oftentimes with IP that we then sort of will take a look and sort of figure out what is the best way to move it forward.
Anyone different?
Yes, I actually champion storytellers. So I really don't look at bestsellers. I look at stories that resonate with me emotionally, and I also look at stories that promote the border between Hollywood and the world, so that incredible storytellers from Italy, for example, or Greece or any of Europe have a chance to get discovered and have their work showcased in a movie or TV. So I'm kind of going a little bit against the wave, but that's my passion, and I know it's maybe a longer journey, but I'm willing to take the chances.
Where are you meeting these storytellers? Where are you finding them? Where are they making an impact with you?
Believe it or not, they query me. They see my Italian name. They started with Valerio Manfredi, who's an international best-selling author, and he came to me to represent him. He did the Alexander the Great, which was set up at Universal. He asked me to rep him, and I'm like, wow, there's so many great stories, and all the Italians come to me for some reason, and all the Greeks come to me, and many Europeans, and I'm really good at reading emails. So whenever I'm seeing an international name, I'm like, well, maybe I'm going to consider it. Maybe I'm going to have my team read it, and that's a little unusual, right? I don't scout. They come to me. and they're European mostly. So there you have it.
Thank you. Michael?
Yeah, can everyone hear me? We have so much IP that comes through that it's daunting, and so as a result, we break our groups into various pieces. So we have people who focus on books, people who have publications, people who have podcasts, people who have format adaptations, people who focus on webcomics. I mean, we source the entire world, and so that can be voluminous. But what we try to do, I think, at the core is you look at something, and I like to look at it and can I see this going the distance? Can I see a television show on the air that could work? If the answer is yes, we want to be a part of it, and if the answer is no or this feels generic, then it's a pass. That doesn't mean we're right, but because it's very subjective. But it's a super important tool in putting projects together.
Can you hear me? I had sort of a unique, I guess, experience just because I was working at a publisher for the last 6 years. So it was sort of an unending flow of IP, mostly comic books, some fiction. And there was also a sort of a business motivation to see those things through. So it became a little bit less of like, where do I find a book? Where do I, find a comic book? It was, okay, we've got all this stuff and we actually have to convert this into business somehow. And so really it became more about reading the landscape sort of externally and figuring out, okay, where does this live the best? What does this want to be? What's the most organic expression of this piece of IP? And being creative about that because, there's only so many, iterations of a particular genre or whatever. So having to figure out, okay, maybe this is a podcast, maybe this is a documentary, maybe this is, and really sort of stretching the boundaries. And that actually became a really exciting element of it to find, especially now with so many different avenues of storytelling, to find cool, unique ways to tell those stories. And then even coming the other way, we would generate ideas and have them written as comic books to then bring back into the marketplace as well. So it sort of happened any which way.
Hi. Well, being Italian, we have no strict rules. That means that we try to get the ideas wherever they come up. We have a platform called Nessuno Escluso, Nobody Left Behind, where every Italian producer can send us working material, ideas, concepts, and we would evaluate each of them. And beside that, we meet producers, we meet writers, we meet directors, we chat with them, and this is another way of getting ideas. And as I mentioned before, we launched this school for writing series, and this is another way to get ideas right from the beginning.
I suppose I come to this from the other side, which is I have a portfolio of IP, and so consequently for us, I should say that the vast majority of stuff is inbound inquiries for adaptation to stuff. But I think it's our job on that side to make sure that the IP remains relevant. So this is one of the reasons why we were with HarperCollins globally for a long time, and we moved the publishing portfolio to Penguin with an idea of Penguin Modern Classics, with the idea of reinvigorating that portfolio and making some news out of that. And then the other thing that we do is, and you mentioned about relevance to stuff that's going on in the world today, we look at the portfolio and see whether there are stories in there that have parallels at the current time, and we see whether there's a possible adaptation. When we generate it from our side, that's typically how we come at it.
That is a great sort of segue. We as a group, you bring up words like, resonates with me personally, not generic, relevant. Is there a way to articulate exactly what you are looking for in something, where you're like, whether you're coming at it from the side of you have the IP and you think it could be a TV series, or whether you are being pitched things, like what's the light bulb moment that something has potential?
I think it's a calculus between the creative, but also the market analysis. So when I saw the Israeli format for Euphoria, when I saw Orthodox kids with guns using drugs, I was like, oh, this is like the movie Kids, and we don't have this on television. Like that to me is like there was a market and there was a hole that we needed to hit, and that was one of the driving forces with that particular piece of IP. And so there are times with if I can see a hole in the marketplace where it's a point of distinction, and it engrosses me, then that's usually enough to go forward with something.
Anyone else want to chime in?
Yeah, I would have to say, do I know the path on how to get this made? Because ultimately we can all say what the audience wants, but we do not know how to get it to the audience, then it's pointless. So I have to know that there is a clear path on how to get it done and be willing to stick the course. And as you know, it changes all the time. So we have to kind of swim uphill. But to me, it's like I have to know, at least me, confidently, that I know how to get this done no matter how long it takes. So I have to be passionate, I guess. Yeah.
I think it's kind of almost the Venn diagram of those couple of things where one, is there some theme, some element of this that culturally is going to resonate? Like, why is this going to matter? Like, why is this going to be on the, Sunday style section? Like, what's going to make this pop from a cultural standpoint? But then also like, okay, but how do I get this done? Like, is this something where I could package this? Is there a writer that I know that's going to be able to really nail this? Who's going to buy this? Being able to kind of piece those couple things together, I think is really sort of the key.
One thing that you brought up a little earlier, Brian, is sort of like, could this be a documentary? Could this be a podcast? How important is kind of proven audience for something when you're having these conversations? I think we've really seen an increase in the last few years of stories that appear in a newspaper or a magazine, then appear as a podcast, then appear as a docuseries, then appear as a scripted series or a feature film. And I wonder how much you need those stepping stones in order for this calculus around, whether it can work with the kind of money that a TV series or feature film takes.
Well, I think you have to, one, be okay with it being whatever it is, and if it's not something that ultimately gets to the promised land, that's okay too. That sort of it is where it was meant to be. But at the same time, like, yes, it's obviously an incredible proving ground for stories that have then sort of run the table and do all of those things. I think so long as they succeed as a discrete business, whatever it is that you're pursuing, I wouldn't say it's probably wise to pursue something as like a lost leader that's like, it's not going to work as a podcast, but man, a series would be amazing. Like that feels like ill-conceived, I don't know if that answers the question. Yeah.
No, for sure. Michelle, when you are looking at this much more open submission process that you have, what's the sort of initial spark that makes you want to have the meeting with the creatives, that makes you want to take the next step? Because I'm assuming you have more than you know what to do with. So what's the thing that sort of lights your fire?
It's a difficult question. Let's put it this way. I know what I'm looking for right now. And what I'm looking for is mainly young adults. Because we know at RAI that if we are not able to get the young adults back to RAI, in 20 years' time we are dead. So we have to do it now. And so this is one of our main aims because, okay, we have our traditional series and we are handling them pretty well. We know what our traditional audience wants, but we have to get the people back that abandoned RAI. So we are focusing a lot on these kind of shows.
That's actually a great lead into a follow-up question, which is, are there any genres that you sort of feel like are tapped out or that you feel like are going to be in 2 years, like the thing that we're getting a lot of? What can we expect? What's rising and what's falling?
I do wonder about like so I remember growing up on these like big epic romance miniseries. Like I remember my mom being obsessed with the Thornbirds, that Australian miniseries, which is based on books. You know, which well, that's a separate issue. But anyway, it was amazing. And I remember it vividly, even though I was like 8 years old, probably shouldn't have been watching. But you know, it's I think one in a series. There's a sort of a tradition of these like epic, multi-generational, sweeping romances, sort of the rags to riches, the family coming from nothing and achieving success, and at what cost. So, Pachinko, I think, is a great example of that, both in the book and in the series. Obviously, Thornbirds, something like East of Eden, you know, Steinbeck, now being made into a series. I do think there's a bit of a lack in the market of that, sort of something that an entire family can watch, or people and you know all sorts of demographics can watch, because ultimately that's a story that's universal, even though it's specific to, let's say, Australia with Thornbirds or Korea and Japan with Pachinko. It is something that every single person, I think, can find some way to relate to it. And I do wonder what that next one is, you know, of that scale. That would be interesting to find out.
God bless you for saying that. I am 100% on the same page as you are. I feel we want to get people, let's face it, young kids are not going to really stick around and look at television these days, unless they're looking at Game of Thrones or something very, very edgy. If there is a way to bring in meaningful storytelling, appealing to the young ones as well, as you know, our fellows at RAI said, and also though being able to also get the adults and all being together and follow the themes. The themes are so important. I think you have to relate to themes and, you know, family, love, struggles, anything that resonates with those common themes that young kids have it and adults have it. That's a way to sort of narrow down the market, which is not really narrowing it down. It's kind of widening it. But I love what you said. I'm 100% on board with that. We need more of those stories.
I'm a huge romantic melodrama fan, so
Thornbird.
bring 'em
I
on.
feel like the Italians are poised for this opera. Like, you know, like it's got to come from you guys, I think.
Yes, we're working, in fact, on a couple of series like this. But what I can say from my point of view, that in Italy, basically, there are different audiences, and they're getting different more and more with the years passing. So we know that we have to tell stories in different way, because you know there's a kind of audience, the younger ones that are watching Netflix, Amazon, and they are used to this kind of storytelling, and they demand this kind of storytelling. And there is another part of audience that is not used to it and wants another kind of storytelling, because we know exactly that you can come up with the best possible idea, but you have to tell it differently from audience to audience.
That's actually a segue into one of my questions that I wanted to ask, was really just when you look at something, do you know going in whether it's a TV series or a film? I mean, it's so funny to me. I grew up in the era of when the made-for-TV movie was still a thing. And now I feel like mid-budget studio pictures and made-for-TV movies have sort of mushed together into this middle ground of like streaming and cable miniseries that has kind of like eaten the world. And I wonder, like, when you're poking around IP, when you're having these initial conversations, do you already know, or is that something that you let creatives come and tell you, this is how we're going to sort of break it down?
I'll go with an example. I'm dominating the conversation. Sorry, guys. No, I just wanted to say, as an example, I started out with a couple of projects that are Italian-centric that we're developing. One was originally a series, and then we started seeing the people say, my God, this is a movie. And then vice versa. So I think we asked what the buyers want, but how many times I've had pilots that then got turned into a movies, or vice versa, movies that spun off into series? It's happening almost every day. If we read the trades right now, almost every single 80s movies is being spun off into a series. So it feels to me that there is a very clear crossover right now. As long as you find your audience and you can tell your story in a wider or smaller way, it's the way to go.
Anyone else have like a, can you put your finger in the wind and tell?
I mean, I think the straight drama film is a very challenging enterprise right now, and so I think there's an instinct to say, like, is this a show? Like, pretty quickly. because the market has sort of really crunched that business down into something where you really got to love it if you're going to pursue it. And if you don't get one of, 5 movie stars, it's sort of like really tricky. But and also, frankly, even big budget stuff like the feature film business has become more and more the sort of amusement park ride business. And so if you don't have a piece of IP that can really substantiate a significant, cost of production to have an amusement park ride, it's probably going to be for TV as well. Unfortunately, that's where the economics of the business seem to be headed. So a lot of times the business is kind of telling you what it is a little.
Alex?
I mean, just to jump in from the author-writer side of things, I mean, my dad was making movies back in the 60s, and there was a lament back then that attention spans were shortening, and with publishing, it was like nobody's reading the books anymore, but all of these things, they're perhaps slightly overblown. Everybody talks about TikTok, and maybe nobody's watching a television series because they're all watching TikTok because it's more easily consumed. But I look around at younger people. I have fairly young kids. What are they normally doing? They're on Kindle. They're reading exactly the thing that years ago people said it's dead. So I think these things go in cycles. I don't think we necessarily need to worry about them. They just, it's a question of being there at the right moment.
I need to go yell at my kids.
To give you an insight on Rai, it sometimes happens that we get a project and we say, oh, this is perfect for 10 times 50 minutes. And then we look at the budget and we say, no, it's much better 6 times 50 minutes.
I think one of the reasons I ask is because one of the questions that I get most often or the comments that I get most often from friends of mine is like, why was that not just a 90-minute documentary? Or, oh my God, I could have watched 10 times as much of that. And it does sometimes feel as though those decisions are maybe being made as much about sort of the business of it versus the creative. And that can, create tension in the final product, and then you get people saying, why was that 4-part docuseries not just a 90-minute documentary? Michael, do you want to chime in?
I mean, from a television selling perspective, on the creative, it's about the engine, and it's about making sure there's enough story where you want to come back episode after episode. But and I'm not a buyer, but I would imagine that especially in the subscription model, you want people being addicted and attached for as long as possible, which would then kind of push you away from 90 minutes into many more episodes. Because that keeps feeding the beast, so to speak.
Absolutely. You want to keep people on the platform. So I'm kind of curious. I would love to just sort of go down the line and have everyone describe a success story, whether it's an adaptation that you love, a recent one that you've worked on that you feel like, really worked for your company. Alex, let's start down your end.
I suppose the most recent one that we've done, which is the Ipcress File, which was on ITV earlier this year in the UK and is on AMC available over here. And that was a remake of a movie that Michael Caine was in back in the 60s, based on some IP that my dad wrote. And I think we briefly touched on this at one point, which was the fact that we've seen this kind of reversion to closely following the books as opposed to let's come up with a completely new idea, let's set it in a different country, let's make the characters different people. So from that point of view, that was the one that I think has been particularly successful for us.
I can't remember a success story. And our jokes aside, I can mention, I did it this morning, The Sea Beyond, Mare Fuori. That's a story based in a juvenile prison, and it was a very demanding and daring story. We did the first season that went so alla Undre 2, but good enough to do a second one. The second one on linear TV was a failure, and we said, okay, we didn't understand anything. But then it boomed on Replay. It did more than 60 million views, and so it was taken by Netflix. And on Netflix, it became the most viewed show on Netflix Italy. And so we understood two things. First, there is a world of youngsters that would not watch linear anymore in their life. Secondly, there is a world of youngsters that don't even know what Rai is producing and offering. But now we are happy because the third season will be released in February on Rai 2, and we will see now if all the people that watch it on Netflix will watch it on Rai. It's an experiment.
I'm going to predict a success. We're in post right now on a movie called Renfield, which is a take on the Dracula story. Obviously to get back into that genre, it's very well worn. There's got to be a very good reason and a really distinctive point of view, which is the opportunity, but also the danger. Universal took a really big swing on a very left of center take, a little bit in the sort of Deadpool mode. And I got to say, during the process, a lot of second guessing and self-doubt amongst the whole filmmaking team. And, how special and unique and different does this have to be to cut through? How many times has the vampire story died? The genre died and come back. And this is the second one I've produced. But I think, we ended up finding this right lane, this right zone, and this right tone, tested it within the last few weeks, and it tested through the roof. And, it's just super appealing. And I think the familiarity of the genre has become now a benefit because, there are elements that an audience can sort of attach to, but the expression of it is so different and unlike anything that's been done in the space before. So, I don't know. We'll see.
I think one of the things that we've been able to do, in addition to IP, is using the international market to create shows. And so, obviously we've had success with change formats, but, Grant Kessman and Ted Miller, who are also here, and myself, we've been able to take IP and set them up either in France or the UK, and then bring them back into the US. And so either based off of kind of known characters or based off of films, or in one case, we took a web series called Dreaming Whilst Black. It was originally a web series. The BBC piloted it. We got the producers to allow us to get the financing for it. So we brought A24 in, and now we're looking to find a US home. And so that's also really cool because it's using the entire world to come up with shows based off of intellectual property.
It's interesting because that's exactly what we're doing too. Coming from the world of international distribution, we tend to really ask the international broadcasters. So, although I come mostly from film and all my book adaptations have been films, now we're going into series. We have a series called L'America with, it's about Italian immigrants, of course, beautiful story. And it cannot be told in a 2-hour movie. There's no way. So we're very excited about that one. And then something else that takes place in London in the swinging 60s, and it's based on the life of my business partner and mother, and that's something that you want to see because it's kind of like The Crown, meets Queen's Gambit, Sex and the City. So you have the audience, and the international broadcasters are gonna already negotiating with us because of that type of storytelling that is longer and it's global. So we're doing the same thing. Awesome.
So much of our stuff is based on IP, but I'll sort of mention, I think, Normal People probably as a great example. This is something that was produced by Element Pictures out of Ireland, and we sold the rights around the world once the BBC commissioned for BBC Three, and that was really special because Sally Rooney, the author, is a big voice of the millennial generation, and I think that if you're trying to find ways to access younger, although I guess I'm an elder millennial, but if you're trying to slightly younger audiences with a kind of voice that resonates really, really strongly with them, but thematically is something that actually can transcend generations, I think Normal People is a great example. Like every single person in the world, no matter their nationality, their race, their creed, their religion, anything, knows the pain, the exquisite joy and the pain of first love, right? That first heartache, everyone knows it. And so what's really fascinating about Normal People is that it was so super specific to Ireland, right? To this West Coast town in Ireland and Dublin and, you know, Trinity College and all that. Even the terms I had to like Google, you know, when I was reading these scripts, I had to Google, so like, what's Debs? I don't know. Oh, it's the prom. Okay, cool. So, you know, so despite the fact that I had never been to these places, I felt viscerally and almost violently, you know, emotionally gripped by them. And so I think that to us felt like a real success, not just commercially, and it was a wild success commercially, but I think sort of culturally too, was I think a really big milestone. So we're really excited to have been part of that.
I mean, it sounds to me from all of these answers is that one thing that has really happened, I think, relatively recently is the increasing internationalization of distribution opens up a whole new world of cross-pollination. Does that also translate to the IP itself? Like, do you have, if you are thinking of, you know, something that would work for a US audience, are you also sort of like searching the slush pile for French publications, Italian publications, Korean publications that could work for that kind of global audience?
Well, we have a couple of shows set up abroad based on U.S. IP. You know, a show in France based on an American comic book, a show in Italy based on an American comic book, and I think, you know, the internationalization really, I think there's an openness to genre in a way outside the U.S. than, you know, more than there's, I think, ever been. I think, you know, broadcasters, you know, studios around the world are seeing that these things can translate, that there actually is a version of these kinds of shows, that, you know, genre storytelling doesn't have to be the domain of only the Americans, and, you know, whatever it is. I mean, and you know, recent successes of big international genre series only sort of prove that out, you know. And so, yeah, I mean, I think the sort of walls are coming down, and I think kind of going both ways on a viewership side, where, you know, American and international audiences are being more receptive to global genre stories, and, you know, local storytellers are realizing that they have these muscles too and can tell, you know, genre stories that go toe to toe with anything coming out of Hollywood or wherever else. So that's how I think it's kind of coming both ways.
Okay, let's. So I want to make sure that before we wrap up, we have a few minutes for questions. I don't know if we have someone speak loudly, or I can run up with my microphone. Or do we have a runner?
I just was curious because the big thing that we see is building or creating buying the IP that can be the world builder, that you then want to do not just one show. You want to do a game. You want to do 3 different shows in the same universe, but different parts of it. You want to do the prequel. And I'm curious if any of you all are looking for that kind of story that has that potential to be, if not Marvel or Star Wars, something. And, you know, what you think this, if you are, what are the recipes for success in those bigger world-building franchises?
We're actually, as of last week, we entered the market with a major sort of like 3 dozen books in the series kind of IP that is, depending on where you live, is pretty much on everyone's bookshelf kind of thing. And it was years in gestation. Like, it actually makes it, I think, harder creatively to tackle something like that because A, you're dealing with an extremely rabid and very exacting fan base, which you need to respect and you need to honor their fandom, but you also want to open up the doors to the tent to have people come in who aren't automatically members of that team, right? So it's a really fine line to tread creatively. So you have to find those writers that just are viscerally passionate about the IP, who know it inside out, backwards and forwards, but also have the imagination to be able to expand the sort of the skin of it, right? And to sort of let their imagination run wild in a way that is still respectful. And then it's a matter of figuring out, okay, how do we tackle it? Is it multiple strands at the same time? Is it sequels? Is it, how do we structure all of that? And how do we come up with a coherent vision for the whole thing that doesn't feel A, overwhelming, B, enormously expensive that we turn off half the buyers? Or if we are doing it at a level that it's enormously expensive, how do we then laser focus on like the 4 viable places that have the sort of the deep pockets to make it work? So it's a lot of strategy, both on the creative side and on the commercial side. And that's great, given that you have access to the IP in the first place, right? And that's where really excellent producers make or break it, in my opinion. Can't quite say, but hopefully it'll be announced in the not too distant future. But yeah.
You can't say anything that I would report on because I'm not allowed to report on it.
Yeah, anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that works to a point. I don't think you can be approach that cynically either, where it's like, oh, there's so many books where this is definitely going to work. It has to be great, obviously, and I think sometimes that can be skipped over a little bit as far as the calculus of well, this is a big whatever it is, so there's going to be an audience and blah blah blah. But there's a lot of bodies on the side of the road of those kinds of sure things that just because they didn't make them well didn't work. And then you've got on the other side, like, who thought Yellowstone would be like a universe? You know what I mean? Like, I think you lead with quality, and that's always going to be the thing that sort of dictates whether or not there's a world to expand beyond that, I think.
If I can just jump briefly in on that, we have a series that is 10 books with the same character, and we've specifically told the agents, we've had a lot of inbound offers on it. We've specifically told the agents, we're not interested in doing anything about that now, for exactly that reason, that you're tying up so much IP, and it's related to all the other things that you own, and if it goes horribly wrong in an early stage, you've burned so much of your work there that you won't be able to resell. So just touching on that.
Hi, I think this is on. I had a question. We were talking earlier at lunch about TikTok, and you mentioned storytelling, and you mentioned finding young adults. How do you balance, for lack of a better term, that sort of democratization of content, right? Those viral things that could be a great series. I mean, Zola comes to mind, where it started as a Twitter thread and then became a film. And how do you look at quality of something that you're like, okay, this is an amazing story, we need to get on that, but it's not a traditional IP in a sense, but if you're trying to attract, that's where most young adults today are absorbing and engaging in content. And so how do you balance that from the traditional, series of books or an adaptation with a really great story that starts in a non-traditional way, whether it be on social or, a viral hit sort of thing?
I would say like there have to be like dramaturgical elements to the story that make sense for expansion, right? I think the bones of the story have to be sound, and it doesn't matter the source, right? I think as long as like the arcs and the characterization, like all of it, as long as somebody who is enormously talented has the chops to be able to see it and to expand on it. Like I think there are elements of these sorts of stories that actually you can find like. You can find those same elements in the classics, right? Like these sorts of arcs, these trajectories of these characters, these conflicts are sort of timeless. And so I think if you find the right producer and writer and creators, let's say, who can find the nugget in that and nurture it, and then build an ecosystem around that project to protect it until it's ready for the market, then I think, for us, it doesn't matter where it comes from.
I'm excited for Makeup Tutorial, the movie. So, yeah.
Yeah, the guy in Saw. How does he do his
Everyone
makeup?
wants to
Yeah,
know.
totally.
3-act story structure in like 20 seconds is really hard.
We might have time for one more if anyone has one. Okay. Thank you all for putting up with my long-winded questions. It's been really lovely hearing from you.
Thanks.
Let's give them all a
Thank
round
you.
of applause.
I'm stealing your mic. Well,